All right. So, but tonight we have a special treat. We have Robin Eppard of the Western Nevada College, and she is here with two of her students, Miley Pearson and Elijah Smith. And they are going to be talking to us about their study of the Pinyon juniper woodlands and the Pinyon Jays in the Wild Oat Mountain area. And so I'd like to, without further ado, welcome them. And I'm passing off the mic.
Is that working okay? All right. Well, listen, thank you so much for letting us come share some of the research that we started through Western Nevada College. We are trying to develop a baseline study of Pinyon Jay habitat at Wild Oat Mountain, which is just north of Topaz Lake in Nevada. The objective of this study was to initiate a baseline survey of trees and general flora and fauna of this area that is known to be used by the Pinyon Jays. The project is supported by a grant from the National Institute of General Medical Sciences. That's a subsidiary of NIH. And we don't just get funding, but we get an awful lot of support from other groups, including the Audubon Society, Alan Bubonic, Ben Sonnenberg with UNR, and Ned Bowman with Great Basin Bird Observatory. So we're glad to see them here to enjoy this. Many thanks to the Audubon Society for inviting our group to speak tonight, and many thanks to Western Nevada College for providing research opportunities to undergraduate students. Miley and Elijah are undergraduate college students. Miley, when she did this project, had just graduated Jumpstart in high school. So we're talking about young researchers that this INRI program targets to increase the amount of research opportunities for lower division students. INRI is actually a biomedical funding source. But I got to talking to the woman who runs it one day, and I got all excited about the Pinyon Jay and this opportunity for this place down by Topaz. And she said, well, why don't you apply for some money? So we got some starter money last year, and this year where you get more starter money, and we are applying for additional funding, which I'll get into at the end of the talk. So just think back a little bit. Like just under 200 years, there really wasn't a whole lot going on in Nevada. Everything was happening in California. The Sierra Nevadas were just this impenetrable fortress. Parties trying to cross them to see what was on the other side would lose, horse after horse, and it was just really difficult. And most of the people with all the resources that California had kind of decided, well, we're not going to worry about it. Well, Jedediah Smith came along in 1827, and he was a trapper, and he and his crew made it over the Sierra Nevadas. They traveled up the Stanislaus River, crossed near Ebbets Pass, then dropped down into the Great Basin, probably very near our study site. So he is probably the first non-native person to encounter the Great Basin in that area. And I like to think that he was entertained by some Pinyon Jays along the way. So, but there's no, from what I can tell, there's no notebook of his travels through there. So we don't really know. This is a map of his path crossing here and on over to Salt Lake City, and the stars is the location of our study site. So in the last 100 years, there have been numerous fires down in the Antelope Valley area. So we are talking Topaz Lake, which is south of Gardnerville, right on the Nevada-California state line. That valley has burn after burn after burn after burn. And if you look at Wild Oak Mountain itself here, you can see that the south side of it has not been touched by fire. On the north side, there was an encroachment of a fire. And this area here, the square, that's an ag burn. So it's off the mountain. These fires have taken out massive amounts of pinyon juniper woodland and pinyon jay habitat. This is from the Tamarack fire just up the highway. As I drive down there, I just shot a couple of pictures showing the devastation. And, in about the 1950s, Topaz Lodge and the residential neighborhood in here was established. Since then, we have Topaz Ranch Estates in the 70s, and on at 395, we have other subdivisions. So we have had some encroachment of urban and rural development. There was ag before that, ranching and mining. So if we go to Google, good old Google, and look down on the area, we have Topaz Lake. This is the Walker River. Here's where they take the diversion off of the Walker River and run it through Topaz Lake. It stores water for irrigation, and then this is the drainage back to the river. The Sierra Nevadas run over here, and the Pine Nut Range ends at Wild Oak Mountain. And I would have had a little bit of a talk on the geology, but nobody's really put the geology here together yet. It's where the Sweetwaters, the Pine Nuts, and the Sierra Nevadas all kind of crunch together. And Wild Oak Mountain just kind of sits out there by itself. So whether it's tied to the base of the Sierras or the Pine Nuts or the Sweetwaters, we would need a geologist to take a look at that. So, showing a little bit closer, I took my daughter out one day a few years ago trying to talk to her about the pinyon juniper woodland and pine nuts. We were really out to find a producing area of pine nuts. So we drove around, went along the road here and looked right off the road, and by golly, there were just cones everywhere. So we stopped and we walked around, and lo and behold, we flushed out over 100 pinyon jays and watched them. They flushed out from back up in here, and then they started doing their leapfrog across here to the east. And so that was sort of my first knowledgeable experience with pinyon jays. I have experienced them out in central Nevada for years, but never really paid much of mind. You know, they were a noise over there in the forest. So when this opportunity with Embry came up, I thought, well, why not take a look at this area in a little bit more detail? So we established a study site. It's about 800 feet long and about 500 feet wide. There's an ephemeral drainage in the middle and has the east and the west slopes on it. And this last summer, we ended up, our project was to inventory this side of the drainage, all the trees, getting a handle on what's there. If you're looking across Topaz Lake, here's our study area. It's on the alluvial fan there, so it's relatively flat. It's hard enough to get around on because it's so rocky. It's very rocky. But once you get past that, it gets steep. And so we are just limited to the flatter areas. This is an eBird list of all the birds that have been noted in the Topaz area. So the ones in red are the ones that we routinely see within our little study site. So things like California quail are almost always there, the flicker, flycatchers, pinyon jays, scrub jays. We also think we have seen the California woodhouse hybrid. We're not positive on that. That's something to kind of follow up and take a look at. Ravens, starlings, that original flock that I saw was about 40% starlings and 60% pinyon jays. And that's the only time I've seen a mixed flock out there. So keep expecting to see it again. Bush tits nest on the site. Dark-eyed juncos and white-crowned sparrows, toadies, cowbirds, yellow-rumped warblers. These are birds that we pretty much see almost every time we're there. Doesn't mean that's all the birds that utilize the area. This is an overview map showing the soils. I'm not going to go into the soil type, but you need to know that the whole mountain is volcanic origin and it's only made up of 2 soil types, and they are incredibly similar to each other. And what you see when you're walking around is a lot of rock, just very rocky surface. So this is a lot of the surface that we walk over on the site. So it may not be steep, but it does have uneven footing. And this is a picture of some pinyon jays hanging out in the rocks there. This is a little bit of a teeter picture. This is on a slope down by the road. And there's a neighbor that comes by with seed, and she feeds them every few days, and they know who she is. Boy, do they show up, and they follow her down the road, and then as soon as she stops, they're gone. They're so funny. So the TAC map showing the habitat quality, most of the really good habitat is over here in the Sweetwaters. Our habitat is kind of minor, but that same couple that brings the seed, they live up 395, just a little ways, just past Holbrook. And they have a story of a baby pinyon jay that was dropped by a red-tailed hawk in their backyard. And they were able to rescue it and raise it and hold on to it for about 1.5 years until a red-tailed hawk came along and ate it. So, so the story, what's really important about that story is that there was a very young bird in this area. And so one of the things that we'd like to do is to walk around and see if we can find some nesting sites. Oops. We are very grateful for the citizen science work that Great Basin Bird Observatory does. And I was explaining to Ned earlier that I apologize, I don't enter all of my sightings and all of my information, but I'm going to try and get better at that. I need to learn how to put it in retroactively. That's a really handy tool because sometimes you get so busy with your field work and getting on to the next thing. But this is from this point up here is from our first sighting when I was out there with my daughter. And then starting in spring of 23, we have a lot more sightings. There are about three of us who are out there sighting. And as I understand it, Ned was out on our site this morning. So finding birds. So when we get out there, pinyon jays aren't always that easy to see. Here's a picture from last summer of a pinyon jay foraging on the top of a little pinyon pine sapling. Not that easy to notice. This is from a few months ago when Miley and I were out at the job site. We had an experience where the birds, I guess, know us. And they came in, there were 40 or 50 of them. And they just went about their business around us. And we sat there, we did our work, and then we sat down and we just enjoyed it because it was amazing watching these birds be very naturally behaved and not worry about it. I mean, they were incredibly close to us sometimes. One was roosting like as far away as Miley and I are right now. So very comfortable with us. But what was really amazing that day was seeing these birds walk through and they're feeding on something. I don't know what it is yet, but the way they can get through this tangle of pinyon juniper branches to me was absolutely extraordinary to see and think about the coevolution of the bird and the pinyon pine and how just they're so well suited for this forest. It's incredible. Again, sometimes they come because the seed lady is there, so. And we often see them flying between tree to tree, shrub to tree, flying along the ground, lots of different types of behavior. And we don't always see them perching in the trees. They do also like to perch on the dead trees that are on site and on the rocks that are outcropped. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Miley to begin the science side of all of this. So, yeah. Everyone hear me? Good? All right, awesome.
So the Pinyon Jay, or Juniperus cyanocephalus, is a species of corvid native to the pinyon juniper woodland of the Great Basin. Pinyon Jay populations have been in decline 4% per year, and no one is quite sure why. Keep in mind that urban development in this area began in the 1950s, so population tracking of Pinyon Jays did not really begin until like 10 years later in the 1960s. Pinyon Jays are currently at an 85% population loss, and are under consideration for threatened and endangered species listing by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Possible causes for their decline can be tied to land management practices relating to ranching, wildlife, fire, and climate fluctuations. Also, urban development can be playing factor into that. There is a really big, like, fundamental lack of knowledge about how Pinyon Jays manage their habitat overall. And it is also very difficult to study Pinyon Jay populations. This is mainly because they have such a large home range. It ranges from about 8 to 57 square miles approximately. Their use of a specific area is also very unpredictable, and they can be very shy. You can oftentimes hear them, but you don't see them. RWNC study site is located along the southern edge of Wild Oak Mountain, just north of Topaz Lake. The broader study site also includes the foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountains, and our specific study site is located just north of Topaz Lake in this plot of trees that appear to continually produce pine nuts. Significant anthropogenic uses and impacts in the area of our study site. So the population of Pinyon Jays of Wild Oak Mountain have not been studied yet. Multiple fires to the north, west, and south of Wild Oak Mountain have reduced the adjoining Pinyon woodland and Pinyon Jay habitat. There's also been further habitat loss due to encroachment of urban and rural development, also agricultural and recreation development. Survey protocol for this study generally followed the recommendations published by Summershoe et al. 2020 and U.S. Forest Service methodologies. This is an overview map of our study site. If you look north, you can see the SR 208, and if you look west, you can also see the US 395 right through it. You can also see the urban and commercial development areas just here and also north. You can also see agricultural development and also along the base of the Sierras here, there has been significant burn damage from fires. So this is an overview of our specific study area. There is an ephemeral drainage running down the middle. It has a southeast and southwest facing slope. Last summer, we collected tree inventory and data on all of the trees on the east side of that drainage. And in the future, this summer, we plan to collect all the data on the west side of that drainage. Here's a photo taken from our study site, we're looking west towards the Sierra Nevada Mountains. At the base, you can see more Pinyon juniper woodland, and if you go at higher elevation on the mountains in the background, you can also see the prior image. If you look at the base here as well, you can see the urban development, commercial development from that area, as well as a road running through to that. You can also see some of Topaz Lake in the background. And also you can see the very rocky substrate of this area. And now Elijah will present that in some details.
Testing, okay. So field data methods included both quantitative and qualitative methods in order to determine the overall physical health of our stand of trees and just the general characteristics. Quantitative measurements included the diameter at breast height, or DBH, which was collected using a 4.5 foot stick and a Bang metal diameter tape, which we do have with us today. Lovely little metal tape, which we wrap around the center of the tree. For crown diameter, we used a Lumpkin 100-foot cloth tape. I'm just going to move over here for a second so I can show all these off. So this was the 100-foot cloth tape that we used to stretch out and collect that crown diameter. Tree height was measured using a Nikon Forestry Pro 2 laser finder, which I have right here. Super handy, much easier than climbing the tree. GPS noted point of interest, or POI data, for GIS mapping, and was collected using a Bad L GNSS surveyor with sub-meter accuracy. I know, great name.
Yeah.
Then, as far as qualitative measurements, we wanted to look at the overall tree health. And in order to do that, we looked at a number of criteria, including fullness of the needles, the presence of excessive sap, presence of male and female cones, and then the presence or absence of browning needles. Based on those criteria, each tree was assigned a rating on a scale of excellent, good, moderate, fair, poor, or dead. And then those are converted to numerical values. As for cone count, the female cones and male cones were, their presence was noted to begin with, and then if female cones were present at the tree, each individual cone was counted on each tree. Male cones luckily were present on 99% of our trees that we found, and were present in such large numbers that we decided to just mark whether they were present. Slope aspect was visually estimated based on one of the 8 cardinal directions. We categorized the substrate the tree was in as being silt, sand, gravel, or rock, again justifying to the rockiness of our study site. General observations of the understory composition, such as the presence of lichens, grasses, shrubs, and fungi were noted, and then the presence and activities of various birds, mammals, reptiles, and insects was also reported. So here is a picture of myself. Measuring that tree height using the Nikon Forestry Pro 2 laser rangefinder. That was my primary data collecting responsibility. Here we have another 3 members of our field crew. We have Nate and Miley beginning to circle the tree to figure out how best to approach finding that crown diameter. Not all of the trees were perfectly even, so it took a bit of effort and working together to figure out how to approach that. Meanwhile, our other member, Haley, begins her cone count. And then after those initial measurements were taken, we have Nate climb into the middle of the tree with that Fang tape and collect that DVH reading. And finally, as far as our data collection goes, here is a sample field data sheet. So this is an actual copy of the data sheets that we were using in the field to collect data. So each of us would have our own copies that reference against each other. And from there, I'm going to hand it once again back off to Miley to give you guys some data.
So these are the results of all of the data that we collected throughout our survey. We collected all the information on the trees on the east side of the drainage from the 12th through the 19th of June 2023. Our total tree inventory was 346 trees. Of those trees, the ones with the DBH greater than or equal to 3 inches, we had 104 of those. And those accounted for 30% of our total tree inventory. The average height of those trees was 14.9 feet with a range of 5.7 through 28.3. Our average tree DBH was 7.7 inches with a range of 3.0 through 23.7 inches. Our average crown diameter was 17.9 inches with a range of 5.0 through 36.7 inches. And the total number of cones overall that we counted were added up to 1,396. Of those cones, of all those cones, the average amount of cones on each tree was about 13, and that had a range of 0 through 221 cones. So average condition for the trees was moderate. They had a range of 4 through excellent. That made that average condition rating 3 out of a range of 1 through 5. Out of our existing trees with DBH less than 3 inches, those were counted as saplings. We had 210 of those, and that accounted for 61% of our total tree inventory. Out of our dead trees, we had 32 dead trees in total, and that accounted for 9% of our total tree. This here are some photos of some of the trees on our study site. The one right here is a tree that would be an example of a tree very, very poor condition. There's significant needle loss and browning, but there is still some green on the sides here, so there's still some left living on. Another thing that we noticed when we were out there were the different tree morphologies. So some trees had an A-frame, like this one here, and then some trees had more of a round shape to them, like this one up here. Another thing that we noticed was that some tree trunks were just one single tree trunk, and then other trees had multiple trunks. These two are next to an example of that. So as you can see here, this is a single trunk tree, and then this one here has multiple different size trunks. Another note is that many of the trees on the study site had damage to just the north side, just like this one here. And that was another thing. Here are some photos of pine cones on the study site in different stages of their development. Usually, pine cones start nascent up here with a little red, kind of like the berries, tiny little red ones. And then they progress to turn into more green. They're not fully mature yet. A fully mature female cone would look like this one right here. It's brown. Looks like pine. And then we have our pollen producing male cones right here. This winter, we went back to the study site and took some more photos. Our nascent cones are starting to mature more and they're starting to turn brown. Here's another photo here of a tree with a pine cone that is fully developed. This tree would be considered moderate condition because if you look in the back, there is still some browning on the needles. This here is a photo of a sapling on the study site, or what would be considered a sapling. And then here is a photo of a Pinyon Jay enjoying a tree that is in excellent condition. So here is a chart showing the height of our trees in order from least to greatest. We want to see if there were any gaps in the size distribution of the trees. There wasn't, from the graph we can tell, there wasn't really any gaps at all. And this may suggest that the environment at the site has been in stable condition for some time. Second graph here, was made to see if there is, if canopy width is dependent on trunk size. Our R squared value of 0.2948 suggests that there is no correlation or very little correlation between the two. One does not predict the other. This chart was made to see if the number of female cones is dependent on tree height. Our R squared value of 0.1084 suggests that there was no correlation between the two. And then this graph was made to see if tree height was dependent on trunk size. This one had an R squared value of 0.5293. This was our highest correlation. It's about 50-50 chance. There's still many outliers. So this could have like a moderate impact on, so height can have a moderate impact on the size of the tree trunk. Going back to this photo of the tree trunks, well, I mentioned that while we were on the study site, we noticed that some trees were single trunk and then some were multi-trunk. This is something that we would like to take into consideration in the future when collecting tree data. So this table here shows the diversity of the flora and fauna observed on sunset while we were conducting field inventory. So we noticed 3 different types of phyla. We noticed plants, animals, and fungi. Of the animals, we noticed 4 different types of classes. Those were mammals, birds, insects, and reptiles. Of those, the representative species were the pack rat, Pinyon Jay, dragonfly, and whiptail. Of the plants, we observed the overstory, understory, and lichens. Of the overstory, we saw many pinyon pines. For the understory, we noticed many shrubs, forbs, and grasses. And for lichens, we noticed a lot of lichens on the rocks throughout the study site. For fungi, we saw a Basidio mycota as evidenced by the puffball. So these are some photos taken by us on the study site. So this is an expired pack rat. You can see the skull and spine emerging from the. This here is a Pinyon Jay perch. Dragonflies. It's an example of a woodtail lizard. And then these are photos of the different shrubs, forbs, and grasses that we observed on site. The lichens on the rocks. And also puffball fungus. There are photos of them, but there were many mosquitoes on site every single day. Yeah, that was fun. But now Elijah is going to discuss that.
So discussion. The objective of the study overall was to initiate a baseline survey of the trees, in general flora and fauna, Wild Mountain, and specifically our study site, since it is known that it can be used by the Pinyon Jays. Monotypic stand of varying shapes of pinyon pines with generally above average condition. Abundant cone production, including nascent first and second year cones, indicate that a continuing source of pine nuts for species such as the Pinyon Jay in the coming years. Just for example, we had that earlier count of 1,396 cones, crazy high number to count by eye. And then we did a quick sample gathering of some cones at the study site. and quickly counted, did some averages on their pine nuts that they had in them to get kind of a rough average of the pine nuts, or the number of pine nuts that would be in an average pine cone. Came out to be about 20. So if you multiply those two together, you're looking at around 27,920 pine nuts that are study cited for produced just this last year.
Is that on the west side only, or?
Just on our east side, so only just the half.
So you've done the east side and you still have the west side?
Yeah, the west side will be the main goal of this. The presence of numerous saplings, minimal tree mortality, and a robust understory suggests this area of Pinyon Pine Forest and Wild Oak Mountain is in good condition. Use of the study site by Pinyon Jays was confirmed. They were seen perching, flying over, foraging, caching, roosting at our study site. The use of the study site by a variety of other species of plants and animals suggests a healthy ecosystem overall. Our data from this last summer was transferred to an Excel spreadsheet, uploaded to ArcGIS, and we are beginning the creation of an interactive database of all the trees within our study site. So this is a draft page showing ArcGIS database. The green dots are going to indicate living trees, the brown will indicate our dead trees, and then you'll be able to click on a individual data point and automatically see the crown, DBH, height, health, the exact GPS coordinate, and a picture of that individual tree. And from there, I'm going to hand it off to Ms. Eppard for some future directions.
I think they did an amazing job. So this presentation is just on the first year of study, and it's only 1 week's worth of field data. So I think the students were pretty amazed at how much you can get if you work as a team and you coordinate your efforts and you do good data record keeping, how much information you can gather on site. So the question is, where do we go from here? Well, we have to complete the baseline study. One of the things we noticed at Wild Oak Mountain, whether it's on the north side or the south side, is depending on the slope aspect, you either have dense trees or you have sparse trees. And so we did the dense side, the southwest facing slope. This next summer, we have far fewer trees to inventory, so we'll have more time to look around and be curious and figure out more of Wild Oak Mountain. So completing the baseline study is funded this year and will be conducted again in June. Last year, we went from noon until 8 at night. The Pinyon Jays were there between 9 and 11. So the students didn't really get a chance to see them much. I'd get out there earlier and catch up with them. But we're gonna go 8 to 5 this summer. And as we continue this, we might shift that a little bit to see if there's any crepuscular activity. And then what we want to do is conduct a survey of Wild Oak Mountain and adjoining Pinyon Juniper woodlands to the west. That's at the base of the Sierras, for presence and absence of nesting sites. And this is part of funding that we're waiting on. We'll hear about it in March. If we do, we'll be out 4 times for 8-hour days in April, just hiking around looking for nesting sites. And we also want to document the use of the broader habitat by Pinyon Jays. We really just focused on this one little area, and there's some great habitat on the north side. We want to take a look at and see what they're doing. And Ned has the idea that we're going to find the nests on that Pinyon Juniper at the base of the Sierras. So we'll look over there. We also are waiting on some funding to conduct an actual vegetation survey on the study site. Included in this year's work is looking at the soil microbiome. What we want to look at is soil bacteria where we have our grove of trees versus where they're caching and there aren't very many trees, and see if there's something in there about the soil bacteria microbiome that is facilitating the expansion of the growth. We want to do Well, I should clarify that. I wanted to do, I had to find people willing to count all the cones. I want to conduct a very detailed cone count, pick a few of the trees and come up with a methodology where we can track cones twice a year in June and in October and take a look at how good is the survivability of the first year or the second year cones between those time periods. That is, again, funding that is pending. And then we have purchased 4 trail cams that we're gonna set up and just take a look at the general use by animals of the area. And we will also orient them so that we can kind of see what direction the Pinyon Jays are coming in from. We've only tracked them directly from the commercial residential area just around the corner of Topaz Lake. We actually saw a bunch down by the lake drinking some water and making noise, so we went down there and we followed them back to the study site. But there is a suggestion also that Ned suggested that this might be part of a population that is down in the Sweetwaters. And we have documented Pinyon Jays down there at Topaz Lake in the east side. So we want to use the trail cam to see where they're coming into and where they're leaving to get a handle on that. Beyond that, we'd like to work with Great Basin Bird Observatory and do some banding of the populations to kind of track them. We would also like to do some telemetry to determine the home range of this local population. Continue long-term the cone survivability survey, since it takes 2.5 years to mature. We've got to kind of think long-term on the state base. We want to take a look at the potential role Pinyon Jays might be playing in reforestation of adjoining bird areas. So there's a lot of Forest Service land out there, and they're very excited about this project. So I'm hoping to pull that together. Fire is something that Embry is interested in, so might have some funding there. And then since it is a biomedical, I always have to put something in biomedical, and it would be interesting to take a look at the DNA of the local Pinyon Jay population. There, when we do some banding, collect some blood. So the last time I was out there, I was there by myself and I was hanging out and the birds were flying around, and it was actually they're on the ground quite a bit, and it was all very wonderful and I was enjoying it. And then all of a sudden, something over there said, come over there. And every bird in that entire, about 50 birds just up. And if you can see them, they just flew off. So I thought that was a good slide for, yeah. Yes.
Do you have any feeling at all about how much more attractive that site looks because of the seed lady? Or the nut lady, or whatever you call it?
I'm not sure. I'm kind of keeping a passive eye on that. She's there a lot and she's been doing this for 22 years. So if she's had an impact, it's already there. But she says that she doesn't run into them that often. So they don't come to this grove of trees every day. And we don't have enough trips out there to kind of get a handle on what their routine is. But and when she's there, it's kind of short-lived and tiny little seeds. Somebody in the neighborhood is feeding them peanuts. So we find those on the site. You know, one of the attractive things about this site is that it is not out in the middle of Nevada. It does have an urban agricultural recreational influence. There's a power line that runs right across the south end of our study site. And when Miley and I went out there a month or so ago, they had graded their road, which they have a right to do, but in the process, they took out one of our trees. But it was sort of wasn't really producing cones at the time, and it wasn't very big, so hopefully it wasn't our star trees, they're big producers. So, so we are under the influence of urban and rural development, and that is a whole nother side that we could take a look at, see what that influence is, so. Yes,
I think there's a Nevada State Park. Is it?
it's on the north and northeast corner is the state park. County park, it's a county park, actually. Yeah,
How close is that?
it's right across the road. So one of the things that happens, and this is anecdotal again from the seed lady, I guess I befriended her and she and her husband like to tell me lots of stories, but we have pictures of deer on the site. In the winter, they like to cross. And we also have a picture of 2 fawns on their own. And when we were back there in the summer, we have pictures of young deer skulls and bones. So I was told that the hunters come along and they shoot the deer from the road. And so there is an impact from that there. I don't have verification of it, but we have a lot of deer bones scattered across the site. And that's one of the reasons for the game cams. We want to see what other animals are traversing that area. And there's a suggestion that there are sage grouse, there's a valley in the middle of Wild Oak Mountain, and that there is some sage grouse over there. So.
Did you consider, last year was very wet, so did you consider the health of the trees based on how much they dropped last year?
Yeah, my gut feeling, again, 1 year, half of our study site, we can't go too far with any of this data, but my gut feeling is that that winter wasn't very kind to the cones. The cones that we saw last June were round and healthy and normal looking and looked like every other cone. But the cones that matured this year are kind of odd shaped. But it's, you know, again, these are all just ideas of research that we can pursue and we can follow. So we did very much consider the amount of water. Now that south side of Wild Oak Mountain did not accumulate a lot of snowpack. It stays very warm on that side and it melts off very quickly. The lake freezes over and the deer get out there, and we lost 2 deer through the ice. So, you know, there's always something to see out there, it seems. So something new to learn.
Okay, so one of the things you didn't measure was how old the deer was. And that fire out.
Yes.
So we're thinking of adding that, is that something to consider? The other thing is, did you find small trees growing, full seeds growing?
So actually a germinated seed, we did not have enough time to look that closely, but we have saplings, you know, this big, and there was actually a sapling about that tall with mature cones on it, which I thought was kind of interesting. So we think that there's a lot of caching that goes on and then they forage, but there just does seem to be this continual supply of new trees in this area. And we looked off to the east where we had seen them doing their leapfrogging and caching. And we found surprisingly few saplings out there and only a few mature trees. Taller trees. So, and as far as doing the age, because of bark beetle infestation, and all that, I'm going to have to learn a lot more about, is it safe to bore a tree to get that data? And for our work, the age of the trees isn't necessarily that important yet. So that's something that I need to look into more. Oh, it's hundreds of years, isn't it? No?
Pinyon Jays.
Oh, Pinyon Jays. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
The birds, I don't know. Do you guys know? Who knows?
Pinyon Jays, I mean, in captivity, 30 to 40 years, but in the wild, they're often shorter.
Okay.
But longer than most migratory songbirds.
Okay.
You predators, that's adults, migratory.
I would guess 15 to 20,
Okay.
prefer that size.
Sounds like they flock more than other jays. I mean, the scrub jays and stellar jays, do they flock like that? All go at the same time?
No.
So during nesting season, would they be flocking or are they gonna be like robins and they kind of separate?
So as I'm learning from Ned, when he came out with my ornithology class in the spring, and we only saw 3, and in the fall, I can see tens of them. That the flocks come together outside of the breeding season, but then they separate to raise their families and stuff.
They are.
Yes.
You know, colonial nesters and cooperative breeders as well, so the young from the previous year will help feed the nestlings.
Does that mean they continue to stay the big flock?
Yeah, so they do stay in the flock throughout the year, it's just a little looser in the spring and summer. Where each family is tending their own nest, but the males and yearling males will all still roost together, females will all still roost on their nests.
You say again how long they last, how long do you think they last?
I would suspect they can live probably 10 to 15 years in the wild,
And
as the adults. Yeah, they typically don't breed until they're 3 to 4 years old, usually the younger males are helping the parents with the following birds. But yeah, they can breed through all things.
The Stillwaters, the Sweetwaters are very close. Do you have any tales from the seed lady or any experience in looking for Pinyon Jays sort of more on the fringes of the Sweetwater to the south of us?
So I've been down that way 7 or 8 times, and at least 3 of them I've seen fairly large flocks, and they are flying sort of northwest to northwest across the agricultural fields. And yes, the seed lady did tell me about this. They think that the population at Wild Oak Mountain comes from Sweetwaters, and that they have seen them often spread out in the agricultural fields foraging. So, but you know, again, 7 or 8 visits down there isn't a whole lot, so.
Are there juniper trees on your study site or just?
Just pinyon pines. I saw the typo on there. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, no, it's a monotypic stand of the pinyon pines, and so I think it's kind of interesting. No, not even little tiny ones, junipers or anything, so. Alan?
The typical flock size you've seen there is about 50%.
Yes,
You have
yes.
any idea how that compares to other flock sizes in other parts of Nevada that have been at least observed or studied?
Down at Topaz Lane, the flock that we saw was much larger than that. But it's on that sample size is 1. So, but again, back to the citizen science guy, Ned.
What was
What's the average
Sorry.
flock size of pinyon?
Average flock
Yeah.
size, super variable, but it depends on, so a few hundred, I mean, the biggest flock I've seen is about 300. Yeah, so typically 50 to 150, I would say, is your average flock size.
You didn't do any data collection on actual use of the area by the Jays themselves? Is that gonna
We
be something you're gonna do in the future?
It was on the back side of our field data sheets, but unfortunately, the Pinyon Jays visited before our hours of the study started, so we did not collect a lot of information on that.
That's where you're going down even more division.
Yes, we'll be there 8 to 5, so.
You mentioned that seeing the Jays, one of their things that they did there was cash, behavior. And I wonder how that compares to the scrub jays that I see in my yard that cash all over the yard. But you seem to forget them both.
Yeah, we have a caching expert in the house.
Well, so that's like, it's a very hard question to actually answer. How many things are actually recovered that catch? But all catchings, like, so yeah, the proportion of the catches that are made, how many of those are recovered is variable by species. Some have better memories than others, like chickadees, maybe have the best. Oh, but so.
Can't open candle.
That's actually not true. You're interested, Dr. Kubani. So, but yeah, so they always do forget some. And most catching species are, it's kind of described as almost compulsive bite. They have a really strong innate drive to catch. And they catch a lot of seed items. And so they are probably catching more than they need. And so some of the leaving, right, and then Pinyon Jays are really good seed dispersers. And so are California scrub jays, and so are most other scrub jays, like Florida scrub jays. And so some of that just facilitates planting, and it's like a different ecological thing. But yeah, we don't know exactly like the exact proportion. Yeah.
I would like to mention that Ben has been gracious enough to be the mentor on our additional funding with Embry for this next year. So wish us luck on getting that funding, so.
So, this is probably an announcement of this, probably what your studies in. So, I mean, do you have a sense that this is an especially productive stand? Like,
Yes.
professor kind of walking around with this kind of style.
There's not just cones every year, but there are all the stages of developing cones on many of the trees every year. And also there are a large number of pack rat middens associated with these trees. And all throughout those middens are old, mature pine cones. And so everything tells us that for some reason, this particular group of trees is just in an environment where it's able to continually produce cones.
I guess this is my answer to the question. Yes. Do you know, I mean, if you had to guess, what would you say? Like the stand was expected.
I had absolutely no idea. No idea. When Ned was out with my ornithology class, we were hiking up kind of on the side of a hill, and I happened to catch a grove up on top of the hill. So I just kept walking up going, ooh, maybe that's another group of trees covered in cones. And I got up there and there wasn't a cone in sight. And so that's part of this year. We won't have as many trees to inventory on that west slope. And we will have time to walk different places that have really suggested there might be some Pinyon Jay activities, maybe some cones up there. I don't know. Yeah.
I think maybe your substrate analysis and your microbiome analysis might answer that question to some extent. The soil biology.
Yeah, well, we're looking at that for whether the trees will germinate, you know, if there's a similarity. But whether, I don't know anything about whether or not a pinyon pine will produce cones or not. I mean, the thing I learned when we got out there is I thought I knew what a pinyon pine looked like. And now I realize it can have any shape, any size, any ratio of height to crown width, diameter, DBH to cone production. It is all over the place. And the number of multiple trunk trees that we have, I mean, sometimes we're talking 15 trunks. And I heard a question about, well, then how do you determine DBH? Well, the TRPA methodology is if you have 2 trunks, you know, you pick the larger of the 2 at 4.5 feet, and that's what you measure. It says nothing about trees with 15 trunks. You know, so our data, we realized that we need to refine that and take a look at that, but we didn't know that. If you drive down 395 and you look at the burned pinyon pines, they are almost all single trunk pinyon pine trees. And so there's like a whole area of forestry that you could go into, you know, on just that alone, so. Go a lot of different directions. I'd love to find somebody who'd like to study the mittens there. Any other questions?
Robin, are you collecting temperature, like climate data as well? Because pinyon pines are so sensitive to climate change. It seems like this would be a great opportunity to sort of, since you're looking so closely at pinyons.
I'd like to look at weather and temperature, you know, precipitation, all of that, snow depth. I'd love to do all of that. The closest National Weather Service site is over by Topaz Lodge. And I'm afraid it's different enough over there that it's not reflecting what's happened. I was quite surprised. We had gone down to Topaz to check the birds out down Topaz Lane and walk over that area. And on the way back, we came back and stopped and got some pictures. And I was so surprised that there just isn't a lot of snow on that south side of Wild Oak Mountain. And compared to the north side was probably packed. I don't know. So we have to get out there and look. You know, we have to figure out a plan to collect the data. So, but at some point, if this project gets continual funding, then we would definitely want to tie in